So how am I a misfit? So I think that I'm not claimed by any particular group. I'm not, I'm a basic scientist by training, but I would argue that the basic scientists don't claim me, and that I really enjoy kind of going back and forth between the silos that we have in academia. So those silos are really evident to me in my years in academia, that there's this big divide between our different faculty members, and even within, say, for medicine, I marvel at the divide that's within the practices of medicine. And so I feel like I don't really fit in anywhere, and that's allowed me to be kind of at that dynamic interface where change happens. Yeah, so I really loved your description of the ecological evolution that happens. I think that's a wonderful analogy.
Do you want to say more about this slide you have in front of us?
Yeah, so this, it's, it's useful for me because it's almost like you can look at it on a daily basis and ask you, where have you found yourself on that particular day? Are you in the fair zone? And so if we look at these things, what would put us in the fair zone? Striving to be comfortable. So doing things that, do it. So today, this is terrifying, right? So doing something that terrifies you is moving you out of the fair zone. And so asking yourself on a daily basis, where did I find myself, and why did I find myself there? Am I in the learning zone? And are there days that I can say, I'm in that growth zone, and be proud and reflect on what pushed me into that growth zone? And then once you get out there, recognize what are the factors that are pushing you back into the fair zone? And can you name them? And can you address them? And can you mitigate them and walk back out into that growth zone? So for me, having a visual is really helpful. And having, like this framework is really, really helpful for me, so that I can check in and ask myself where I am on a particular day.
So let me ask you a question then. And this, first of all, this slide is just wonderful. And I think if you were to apply this to any other issue that has to do with social justice and inclusion, one could find parallels easily as we move toward our growth.
Yes.
In talking about being a misfit, I remember in my first year of medical school, that's when the first White Coats for Black Lives demonstrations by medical students across the country were happening, including one that was being organized by some of my own classmates and upper year medical students when I was first getting started. And I remember this powerful demonstration, a die-in right in front of the medical school, or I should say the education building, because it's more than just the medical school. There weren't that many faculty from the medical school that were present, but you were there. Mm-hmm. And not just one time, but repeatedly, as demonstrations and times to speak out were being organized. It was hard not to notice that, wow, the person who's been teaching me biochemistry, the basic scientist who's teaching me biochemistry is showing up at these protests as a white woman. Mm-hmm. So I've always kind of just wanted to ask, like, why and how? Like, how is it that you were the person who showed up not just once, but multiple times?
Dr. Kim, that question is an honor coming from you. It really gives me chills just having somebody like you ask me that question. I think it goes back to just being curious about students. So like being curious beyond just what you're teaching them. Like obviously you have a responsibility to deliver the curriculum to them and do your very best, but being curious about what matters to them, being curious about, what it took for them to get to medical school, and using that curiosity to propel you into spaces that maybe you wouldn't normally be as a basic scientist. And I honestly thank God every day that my students have welcomed me into those spaces and been patient with me as I've learned. And it's really, it's enriched me so much as a person. And I really wish I could find a way to explain how worth it is to know your students on a deeper level. But I know that if given the chance, you will make this all about me. So I want to hear more from you, Dr. Kim. I want to understand more about what keeps you in that growth zone. So please tell us a little bit more about you.
I knew you were going to ask me this question. I actually don't feel prepared to answer it. It's so funny.
That's okay.
I just want to reflect.
Well, tell us something that is important to you that you really want to convey to the audience, and it doesn't have to be that particular.
Yeah, I think one way that I share about this is just growing up as a Korean kid in the deep South, in rural South Carolina, where my parents had decided for some reason that rural South Carolina was the right place to raise a family. It's very, very black and white small town called Bennettsville. The whole county there was about 30,000 people in 1980 when my family moved there. So looking back at census statistics, about 30,000 people in the whole county, and 25 people of Asian descent, otherwise about half black, half white. And so my family of 5 was, we were a fifth of the Asian population there. And I just remember my own very kind of like racialized schoolyard experiences, and also really trying to understand my place in this weird social dynamic as kind of a shy, quiet, overly sensitive kid. And I think and also seeing the struggles that my family went through, my sister and my brother also, the struggles that they went through to have a place of psychological and sometimes physical safety growing up, just activated me from a young age to have big questions. And also I think that has, to this day, it's always been important for me to help others to have a place of belonging, to increase spaces of belonging and safety for as many people as possible. So that's really what drives me. And there's no end to that work, right? I think we are all always seeking safety and belonging for ourselves. But I think that when we realize that that work also extends to doing that for others is when we can really become more than just allies and become advocates.
Exactly. So beautifully said. So that, so often those are the early childhood experiences that imbue us with a desire to not leave anyone behind. That's really what we're doing here. Don't leave anyone behind. And that sort of comes to, oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Please finish.
No, I think we're both thinking about, okay, what's the next question going to be? What we're going to pose to each other. So if you've got one, I'm listening.
Well, I was thinking about what it is about humans that cause us to kind of silo ourselves into groups and do this us and them thing, which really interferes with this journey into the growth zone. And so I was doing some reading, and I'm sure you're aware, there's this thing called in-group favoritism. And psychologists and psychiatrists know so much about it, but for me as a basic scientist, these are just brand new concepts. I'm sure I've been aware of it kind of just observing it and not putting a name to it. But this in-group favoritism is sort of this very deeply rooted human behavior where we, it doesn't take much for us to assign ourselves to a group. These can be very superficial things, but once we group ourselves, we're very willing to assign resources and time and mentorship to those we consider in our group. And it takes a lot of reflection and a lot of awareness to overcome our our desire to put ourselves into groups. And so in my experience, you know, I've seen that's very prevalent in academia. And I think it has a lot to do with what, again, coming back to the sort of initial discussion that we had about silos and division in academia, and how we can come together to better serve students.
Yeah, this really speaks to a concept I've been thinking about lately, which is solidarity, which is, when do we speak out or speak up or take action on behalf of someone else, or on behalf of a group that we don't belong to, because we understand that their safety or liberation is tied up with ours. So that you know, I think as we grow in our advocacy, I think that the practice of solidarity becomes really important. So I'll just give like a really concrete example that's relevant to this conference. So this is a joint effort between students in the School of Medicine and in the School of Nursing. And the physicians who speak, I think too often will forget that the School of Nursing is a core part of this event and who's participating. And so in order to really make sure that the experiences of those in the School of Nursing are lifted up, you know, I feel like it's my job as a physician to act in solidarity and to point out when somebody slips up, or to acknowledge myself when I slip up and don't include students in the School of Nursing, right? And the faculty from the School of Nursing. Mm-hmm. So that's just a very concrete, very small way of illustrating like what is solidarity. And there are much bigger ways that we need to do that all the time. And it's often those of us who are in positions of privilege who have the most important roles in practicing solidarity, and not in a way that speaks for others or takes away their voices, but actually in a way that increases the opportunity for others to speak up and to share their experiences.
Oh, thank you. That is such, those are such important points. And it's something that, you know, even as a basic scientist, being at this interface between science and the clinical world, it's something I'm very aware of, that there is this this issue between nursing and medicine. And you know, we have, of course, the School of Medicine, School of Nursing faculty on the call with us there, Dr. Jan, and I know we've had some discussions about this, but yeah, it's a great example of how division is created. So I wanted to take a moment just to, for people who, so we talked a little bit about, you know, kind of being a weirdo, being at this interface between different groups. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how teaching and mentoring can be an act of social justice. Because for faculty who don't have a role in treating patients, sometimes we get lost in the discussion about how medicine can be used as a social justice tool. And so what is it that we can bring to the table if we're not healthcare providers? And so I thought about, as you mentioned earlier, the power that we all have, and how is it that a basic scientist can kind of have a seat at the table. And so the concept that teaching is an act of social justice, I thought was a really interesting one. And so in a way, it's like my way that I would feel that I could contribute to changing the face of medicine and changing the face of science by being that teacher, right? That we have a very diverse student body. We struggle, so we're doing a great job with student diversity. We struggle tremendously beyond that. I don't know how diverse our residents are. I know for certain our faculty are not diverse. And so what are our students see when they come into that first block, and are we creating a welcoming and inclusive environment? And is that even a priority for our faculty? Are they even aware of the impact that they have on students as they immerse themselves in that first block of education? And so teaching and mentoring, I think, is a way that people who are not directly involved in patient care can still feel like they have a seat at the table and that they can affect change.
That brings up a couple of thoughts for me. One is just reflecting on my own experiences in the School of Medicine. I'll say first that I could tell it was true coming in, and was glad to experience it all the way through, that there really are wonderful allies at every level of the School of Medicine and throughout the health system. So I think it's important for us to know that, and to figure out who those allies are, and form personal relationships with them in whatever ways that we can. Mm-hmm. I think that this conference is one way that we figure out who those allies are, and find our pathways to learning and growing more. And at the same time, I'll say that there is this really odd disconnect that a lot of my classmates and I experienced when I would look around the lecture hall, because we were actually, in the lecture hall together, not just on Zoom,
right,
as the students are right now, and seeing just how remarkably diverse the student body was then and is now, in so many ways, not just talking about racial diversity, but in so many ways. And then thinking about how the people teaching us at the front of the classroom, whether or not they represented that diversity, often I think we would find ourselves questioning whether they understood who it is that they were lecturing to. Right. If they understood and could relate to the lived experiences of the people who were accepting this teaching. I think that because we recognized you as an ally, Dr. Sweeney, that we could feel that was true when we were learning from you. But that was too often, I would say, not the case. And that adds to the stress and interferes with the learning for the students in those situations who may feel like there's just another small or big reason they don't belong. So I do think that there's work to do, and I think that those of us who are allies need to approach that work in a way that is kind, and also that provides a way forward for everyone. But I do think we have to stand up for each other and practice that solidarity.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, but what keeps you going when you run into bumps in the road? Because I know this isn't always easy, and this has been a hard year. This is like, sometimes I feel like, wow, this is a hard day in the midst of a hard month, in the midst of a hard year, for so many reasons, right? What is it that keeps you going?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I just wanted to, before I answer that, I wanted to touch on something that kind of came to my mind as you were speaking about this. And it's that students, particularly medical students, they are, so excuse me for saying this, but typically much more advanced in terms of awareness of these issues than, say, the science professors are. And I know I might take some heat for that, but that's because science, and that's a broad term, is really lagging behind medicine, the health professions, by a good decade. So when it comes to recognizing the benefits of diversity and recruiting a diverse workforce in science, again, a good 10 years behind. And the training that scientists receive, and of course then faculty who end up teaching science, doesn't touch on any of this. So to a big degree, that puts people at a disadvantage. And unless they're curious about extending their training beyond just their professional responsibilities, they could go through their entire careers with blind spots about their students, what their students' lived experiences are, and the journeys that students took. And so I think, you know, I would put it in my 2 cents saying that we've got to change the way that we train scientists, because those are for the first 2 years, those are the people that our medical students are seeing. And there's a huge gap, I think, in the training.
I want to acknowledge you for your work with the faculty, doing implicit bias training and putting yourself out there and taking risks as a faculty member to champion more growth and a change in perspective, you know, a change in the culture, really, of the School of Medicine. It took me a while to figure out that the health system and the School of Medicine are not just one thing. It's a sort of a motley crew. It's really kind of a wide range of different people and groups that get thrown together to accomplish this training. So, so I appreciate your role in that, and your the courage that you display in working with the faculty. I'm aware we only have a few minutes, and I wonder if there are questions or comments, because there's so much in the Zoom room.
We have about 8 minutes remaining. The session will be ending at 12:10, just for your guys' heads up.
Great. Yeah, so invite questions, either just speak up, or you can put them in the chat box. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, Dr. Sweeney, is there anything more you wanted to share?
I'm just gratitude. Like I said earlier, my mentor is here, and I'm just so honored that she took the time, Dr. Jan, to be here and provide that support. That makes a big difference that she's here. I mean, gratitude for the people that have taken me under their wing. When I was an awkward, I'm still awkward, but certainly when I was an awkward little chick, you know, they took me under their wing, patiently educated me, and expanded my world. And I'm so happy to be at that interface. I'm so happy to not belong to any particular group, to be really in that zone of change. And so just gratitude for the opportunities that I've been given.
So there's a question here in the chat from Sophia Crosby. What are your thoughts about the language that folks who engage in social justice work use regarding moving from allyship to advocates to accomplices? And Rosa Magana adds, or partnership. Sophia adds, from my understanding, advocates and allies support change ideas and policies, whereas accomplices focus on dismantling structures and systems of oppression. I'm just curious about your thoughts. You know, I'll be honest. So I didn't share this earlier, but I did social justice advocacy and worked in what some call the nonprofit industrial complex in the Bay Area for more than 10 years before coming to medical school. And so I had a certain level of kind of training and practice in this area before. And in that work and the culture of advocacy, we don't really talk about allyship to advocacy. It's not a part of our discourse. It's more like we talk about campaigns and campaign strategy. We talk about coalitions and who can we join forces with. And we talk about power and how do we understand who has power and influence, and how do we build our own power and influence to change policy and to change culture. And so, but I think in the process of changing culture, attitudes, and policy, we do need so many more people to step up, to be willing to educate themselves and others in a way that helps people to get past feeling wrong. So I think that's really where so much of our challenges are. So Sophia, I'm not sure I answered your question, but that's kind of my reaction to it. Even the title for this talk is a little strange for me, but it's just something that Dr. Sweeney and I landed on from something we did together a couple of months ago. So we just kind of decided to go with it. But I don't know, what do you think, Dr. Sweeney?
Yeah, you're right that this title is kind of historical based on a couple sessions that we have been involved in. And so, and then of course, Dr. Kim, I think, I appreciate how much knowledge and background you have in this area. And I definitely feel like a novice when I am asked questions about definitions and things like that. So I wouldn't attempt to answer a question like that. I'm just still in the learning phase.
Yeah, gosh, I wish we had more time. There's a question from Kim Schuster. You both touched on ways of promoting advocacy from internally within the organizations we work with. For example, implicit bias training, being good teachers and mentors, et cetera. What ways can we work in our communities to create change? Are there any specific resources in Sacramento you both have in mind? I'll just say that, there's this saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Mm-hmm.
And so my first reaction to this is that, well, I guess I have a two-part answer. One is that I think we have to decide for ourselves what's the issue, or what are the issues that we care most about, where we really feel like almost we have no choice but to get engaged on an issue, because our own liberation and liberation of others are tied up in that. And then the second thing is, after we make a commitment to be like, I'm going to learn more about this, I'm going to do more about this, is to figure out who can you team up with. Who's going to be part of your Avengers team up. And I have to say, in Sacramento, there's so many groups that are doing so many things when it comes to, gender diversity and inclusion with the Gender Health Center, or dismantling the prison industrial complex and racialized policing with Decarcerate Sacramento, or standing up for vulnerable immigrant communities with NorCal Resist. So, there's resources and services and programs for sex workers, for survivors of domestic abuse and intimate partner violence. The list just goes on and on. Sacramento is a big place. And so I think part of the work is figuring out, okay, who's already doing this? And is that a group that I can feel like I can be a part of? How can I contribute to that group? And then sometimes the group doesn't exist, or it's not within easy reach. And that's when we have to think about how do I kindle a campfire of my own and ask a couple of others to join me. And how do we keep that fire lit and invite more and more people to sit around that warmth? So there's a whole bunch of work we could do to talk about how to do that, but that's conceptually the approach that I take to it. Our time's running out. We have less than a minute. Dr. Sweeney.
I will put in a plug for Doctors for Camp Closure. Dr. Kim, I know that's something that is a very meaningful group to you. So Doctors for Camp Closure, something that Dr. Kim is involved in, and I would put my plug in for that with the remaining 30 seconds that I have. Just want to thank everybody so much for including me in this space. It's such an honor.
I hope this was helpful. Just 30 minutes is hardly enough time, but it's a taste. It's an exposure. Thanks everyone for your attention and your participation.
Be good teachers. If you have the opportunity to teach, be good teachers.